Hello everyone, today I'm here to talk about The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis and my ongoing reviews of the Chronicles of Narnia series by C.S. Lewis. I feel like, of all the books, so I have finished reading all of them so far, I feel like either Prince Caspian or The Silver Chair are the weakest in the series. And I feel that way because in The Silver Chair there is Eustace, and he was, in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. He's a cousin to the Pevensies, the OG children. Well, I guess not once you get to the Magician's Nephew, but the ones from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, probably the best known book of the Chronicles of Narnia, right? And it also introduces Jill, who is a new character. And I felt like it was the weakest in the series. Sorry, I literally had to look at this. I was like, wait, was her name Jill? I can't remember. Oh my gosh, am I going crazy? Okay, sorry. I felt like it was the weakest in the series because there was the least amount of character development for the characters. Eustace was kind of just Eustace throughout. He'd already, I felt like, got all of his character development from the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I feel like he didn't really develop any more in this book. And then there was Jill, who I felt like was just kind of there. I feel like she wasn't that super important, and she didn't really, it was basically like, oh, now I know Narnia exists, and I felt like she didn't become some super brave person, or she didn't, learn that much. I mean, she learned some things, right? But it just didn't seem as compelling as any of the other books. So that's why I think overall it was the weakest in the series. And then there was the timeline. So basically, The Silver Chair is about Caspian's son, Prince Rilian, and he has been enchanted by a witch. And no one knows if he's still alive. No one knows where he is. And at the beginning of the book, Eustace and Jill see Prince Caspian sail away, and he is a very, very, very old man at this point in time, which made me wonder how old he was when he had Prince Rilian, or how old Prince Rilian was by the end of the novel, because at some points it seemed like he was a young boy, 16-ish, but at other times it seemed like he was an adult. And so I was just kind of confused by Prince Rilian's age overall and how that related into the timeline of Prince Caspian's life. And part of it also made it feel like, so the end of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Prince Caspian is married, and it kind of gives the impression that they had a nice long life, and many kings and queens came from them, and everything was cool. And then you read The Silver Chair, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but that is not what happened. And so I felt kind of tricked almost by The Silver Chair, which is why I also felt like it was the weakest in the series. Just overall, the villain wasn't as strong, the world building was meh, the timeline seemed a little strange, especially when you relate it back to the Voyage of the Dawn Treader's ending. And so I wasn't super impressed by The Silver Chair. There was still definitely some really fun scenes, some really well-written areas, and scenes that would stay with me, or the imagery that I liked, but overall, not the hugest fan of The Silver Chair, for the reasons I already mentioned. Still a good read though, if you're going to read all of the Chronicles of Narnia, you definitely have to read The Silver Chair, and so do it. I feel like also, as another point, once you read The Magician's Nephew, you're not quite sure where the witch in this book comes from. And I'll get to that when I get to The Magician's Nephew, or I will try to get to that and remember when I get to The Magician's Nephew. So, that was a really short review of The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis. Like I said, some good scenes, but overall very, very meh compared to the other books, especially The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which so far has been my favorite book. And actually, after reading all of the books, is probably my favorite book in the series, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So, oh well. They're not all going to be wins, right, CS? Okay. And because this title is The Silver Chair, I am going to ask you, what is your favorite chair? Which sounds really weird, but maybe there's a chair in a movie that you really liked the look of, or maybe you really like the throne in Game of Thrones, which I'm counting thrones as chairs, not couches. You can't count couches, but chairs you can count. And my favorite one to lounge in, definitely as a kid, was just the chairs in my living room at home. I was small enough then that I could just like curl up in a ball with a book and be totally comfortable. I remember reading Stephen King's book, 11/22/63, in high school in 2 days, curled up on one of those chairs. So that one, and then I'd say my favorite fiction chair. There is this movie called Killer Sofa, and I said I'm not counting sofas, but I'm counting this because in the movie it's definitely a giant armchair. It's not a sofa. So it was strangely way better than I thought it would be. Even though it was just a silly horror movie, it was highly entertaining, very ridiculous, but I expected it to be one of the worst films I've ever seen, and it's not. So check out Killer Sofa. I believe it is a New Zealand production, but don't quote me on that. But I felt like it was from New Zealand, and I don't know why that's sticking in my head, but those are my favorite chairs. So thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy books or enjoy listening to book reviews, go ahead and like, subscribe, comment down below what's your favorite chair, and tell your friends if you have friends who like books and to read and to write and to listen to someone ramble on about books. Go ahead and tell them about me as well. Thank you so much for listening, and y'all have a great day.